There is fire and the need of fire. There is fire clearing the crowding near the streams. The heat and the fire and the heat of the fire dries and opens the seeds. The ground is a fertile and burning place. Depending on the view, there is devastation. Depending on the view, the ground is covered in ash. Agencies begin to control the fire. Agencies begin to control the wear of fire. Agencies control fire to correct their own effects on drowning and crowding by the streams. The fires grow larger than the agencies intended. The fires reach the gates around the agencies. The streams are damaged and there is drowning. The agencies return to control their own creations with water and more water, and everything is wet, too wet to begin again. We are both separate and inseparable from one another. We are a contradiction and barely surviving, and near us burns a ring around the fallen. Around the rings are the structures which are ours as much as they are not. Highways are built through the middle. Objects and hills are claimed into ownership. Ownership is taken into the hands of banks whose vaults are filled with other people's currency, but not all of it. If everyone went looking for what was theirs and took it back, there wouldn't be enough for everyone, and some would have to give up pieces of what they believe is theirs. We are not willing to do that, mostly made of separateness and inseparability. Orientation is not about north-south or left-right. It's about bodies and space. We don't notice orientation until we are disoriented. And we are oriented in an already familiar world where north and south already exist. It is not about how to find our way, but about how we come to feel at home. The effects of inhabitants include how we face this home and how it is reachable and proximate or not. The familiar is shaped by actions that reach toward objects that are already within reach. How we begin, how we arrive, from which side, how here and there appear, where we dwell. These homes are the histories of arrival, failures of extension. It is not controlled, but we are controlled by the structures and the systems, by economies and red, say ecologies and erasure. We don't want agencies to redistrict themselves to let us in. We want agencies to let us in without keeping parts of us out. We want water that holds, in which we wrap together and sleep. Yesterday, when we talked about it, we spent the day trying to get farthest away from whoever it was that was closest. When we were touched, we forgot the urge to recoil. Enter character whispering. We move along the edges of a body of water at night. Even if it isn't night, there is no discernible distance across. Occasionally we sink deeper, but do not submerge. Stagnant water, covered in scum, and always a body along the edge. People know when they're taking something from you. The agencies are made out of concrete and brick. We walk among them. We walk within them. We are infected. Curtains are pulled across the machinery. We are infected, but not all of us, not yet. What isn't about inheritance is that we are given what was never ours as a perpetuation of private property. A family is designed to stay closed in behind walls. All that upward mobility, or lack thereof. One place is spending $13 million on new cages, and another 12 on cracking the crust that is covered with concrete. Someone grows ill. We sign away choices to the whitest buildings. We're exhausted from all the structural analysis, but it is a requirement if there is anything else to be imagined. In the darkness, we go to a quieter room. How to hold on across what won't appear in legal documents. We do not choose like one day we can call it off if it is too hard. We choose because we've found each other. Enter characters surrounded by pink. And if we liked it as we were pinned down, but never asked, and again we were pinned down, and usually like it when others use their big voices over our own because we don't like the sounds from our mouths. Who have we learned this from? And also, there can't just be one shape of responsible, not just agencies or luck or genetic code. We all get caught somewhere along the way, and the tether is decipherable on only some of our bodies. A sure sign is starting to believe what is said about you. Next comes keeping secret that you believe it. And the woman screaming on the street has this tremendous power. See how everyone quiets and makes wide circles around her. And say she were of our own, one of our own, we'd quiet the room. Inheritance comes from all directions. Whole neighborhoods defined against one another. Bootstraps against heaving evidence. There is a thing called pushed. It is inside the mouth. Surrogate is inside the mouth even when it is not. In an iron field, we want to make syllables to wanting and say doubt is like the fog. We have letters and witnesses and still question our own remembering. Is it worth reconfiguring the narrative if unrecognizable? Just because there weren't no scars does not mean there were no marks. It is worth saying we still look exactly as we always have. Enter characters surrounded by pink. Below certain lines, internal organs give out at an average rate of 10 years earlier than expected. Statistics even have opinions. Say disease and mean economy. Say stable and mean afraid of loss. How to love across illnesses that make people unlovable. I dreamt someone I loved had been walking in the desert talking to himself. Say how to care at the edges of everything is just fine. None of these are the worst cases or the contexts that break, but there is so much breaking and so much drowning. We counted down in the rain until morning, but we changed courses because we had come wanting to talk of exceptions, and so we are beginning to recognize the shouting as our own. A little bit from that. You see my clips? So this one is, I have no idea, but it's in 2 parts. And the first part's really condensed and the second part's spread out. And the first part is called We Are Scanning in Refusal to Settle on the Whole Image. Sometimes the conversation veers off and staggers in a different direction, sometimes swallowed whole by silence. To mouth the words ocean or dream or limbo is like how gravity is always what we expect, but it always surprises us. I feel I should stop, or the habitual repetition of words and shapes and sounds is like throwing up in my mouth and swallowing it down again. If someone else could come through me, if I could hear something else, and how to know when the cycle has ended? Because some questions have no answers, and we are used to never admitting that we don't know. The answer is when a new one begins. Always comes back to ability, doesn't it? I feel myself being counted while moved outside. A landscape. It is done too quietly and with no light, hiding in the leaves that don't fall around here. How in writing a letter we might end with putting you back together bone by bone across the long night. I'm sharing a bed already, and this sharing becomes a consequence of loving inside containers of scarcity. How this is like the process of naming a country as itself, and how that delineates who is and is not us. We cannot think of anything that is not something without thinking of the original something, not us in reference to us. A woman cries in front of the room while reading a love letter, and she becomes different when the others do not raise their eyes to cross the boundary, not us, not of the same deserving matter. After 16 years, the recipient of the letter is sent to Arizona, where another waiting period begins, this time under a jurisdiction of extraction. No one left across the fence, but at least across the fence is not a cage above a salty sea, right? I think we are trying to think about why we so deeply need to be a singular thing, and where we were taught that this was more necessary than anything else. I don't know land, and neither did the people I came from. And if I had, I would have been removed from it by the fact of birth and death, which is the one function still connected to a sense of what is larger and unnameable. If one is born in the call, and is a glowing orb breathing in water, what becomes of a distinguishing characteristic? When will she unlearn being cloaked and still be her own cloaking? When she arrives to where I am standing, I can't say any of the things I've waited so long to say to her. It takes nearly 3 days of packaged food to admit how hard the holding has been. Like, when everything looks like it is in exactly the right configurations, that's when we need to start asking the questions. How do you know that you can't love into a framework of abundance? I tell her that I have known and haven't had any other reason to say, riding between peninsula and unpacked boxes. Our sheets are green. I'm not sure I like them, not because I don't like green, but because it begins to feel like every other shade is excluded in getting used to this and no longer noticing the green below my skin in the short nights when everything is quiet and just fine. I'm trying to say that I'm tired and far from home. I sleep on trains and in chairs. Then, listening to the radio, there are people using voices that sound like they are arguing, even when they are not arguing with one another. A man calls in and his voice is broadcast. He has a stutter which makes me think he's had a recent loss, a sudden disappearance of a thing that he keeps looking for, like he can't remember where he put it and he needs it. I bite my tongue around a blueberry and offer her one, and the other man being broadcast who accepted the call says murder, but says it just like he says all his other words. The milk tastes sour, which makes me remember that it's my turn to clean out the fridge. I need to call my mother, and when she answers, she says that another one of the boys from the neighborhood is having a funeral next week. I love you is a tulip spelled correctly. A sense that it is always dark, which means we are gripping. Last time I saw her, she was moss untouched, and reaching an arm upward, I knew I should be doing something else, at least sleeping. But with all these images running around, and all the time spent looking at photos of other people, there comes a swirling across my eyes, which she asks about, and even though I don't tell her about the ways I long for things that I've taught myself to believe I cannot have, she knows there is something underneath. I am noticing the effects of being alone for a while, a shipwreck believing in amber. Okay, I've said quite enough. I love you. Good night. A tulip spelled correctly, and we leave the room empty but for two voices arguing and not with each other. And the second part is called This Inconsistent Fragility. Is a wing, is two wings, is many counted and a territory unmappable. We place spaces to signify having been placed in space. And why here? Mention it as night. How the stars are where you are. Starts off the day truncated. This inconsistent breathing. To unsay, one has to care about what one is not saying. How molded to designation. How confined. As the train made the hair fly off the forehead, the speaker said, "It's as if the distance were all around your body, and we get worried, not wondering yet where it went, it being an expression of standing still." Know it, by the looks of it, a body is found, a body is reached for at the edge, which could not cross it, which was also undecipherable, tracing its language, which does not mean one is unaccompanied. The old man steps out to urinate in one direction. A train passes and slips, a case of bourbon in the trunk. Is it our loss or its own? Sink threatens with murky water, everyone refusing baptisms, not raised with any deities, eating potatoes. In the end, taking one step out, at least by the looks of it. This is the last one. And all the ways it was transformed when it took flight. Rooted barnacles sold in the red marketplace. How that happened. How it happened that she was red too, became angled as a color, and she herself is sold off, piece by piece, carrying the smell of a wing, two wings, many of them, the wires across that which it calls out, the faces slowly changing shape, becoming other than what was helped into becoming, held still by not remembering. How are the stars over there, where it is day?